Now, on the southwest coast of Madeira, an island known for its rugged cliffs and dramatic scenery, lies a once sleepy fishing village. A small town that was seemingly unaware of the aquatic riches that lay on its doorstep. Cut off not just from the mainland of Portugal, but even from Funchal and the rest of Madeira itself. But in the early 1970s, things changed, as a handful of adventurous European surfers stumbled upon a flawless right-hand point break. The wave would go on to become one of the best waves in the whole of Europe, and it was a break where deep Atlantic winter swells met a boulder-strewn crescent of coastline and shaped those Atlantic swell lines into long, powerful right-handers. At first, news of the break spread slowly and was sort of only a whisper between a tight-knit group of European big wave chargers. Unlike the better-known big wave breaks in France and Spain, Jardim remained a well-kept secret for years and became one of the best underground big wave spots on Earth. And it stayed this way for 2 decades. By the 1990s, and like with most places, the secret eventually got out. Surf magazines began featuring Jardim and showcased the wave as a big wave point break, drawing comparisons with Jeffreys Bay and a mirrored version of Punta de Lobos in Chile. The break's reputation soared, and soon, big wave Daves like Ross Clark-Jones and João de Macedo began booking tickets to Madeira. And Jardim's raw exposure to the fury of the North Atlantic during winter made it the perfect big wave venue for European chargers. And it wasn't just big wave chargers that the place attracted. You know, on smaller days, the wave was a really sick wave. It was a powerful right-hander with sections for tubes, sections for turns. It was just a really sick wave that worked a lot of the time. And in winter, it was a really reliable place to go for a fill of right-hand point break action. With the rise of surf tourism, Jardim also experienced a rise in tourism in general. I mean, if you've ever been to the place, you'll know how beautiful it is. It's just a little cluster of houses right on the coast there, and you've got these huge dramatic cliffs all around you. It's a beautiful place to be, regardless of the waves. So eventually, small guest houses began popping up in town, surf documentaries began showcasing the wave, and international surf contests were also considered. And by the early 2000s, what was once a secret and an overlooked gem in the surfing world became well known and was now well and truly on the surfing map. If you want to read more about that time, you know, before it was sort of well known, read Barbarian Days. There's a whole chapter in there where William Finnegan, the author, spent a whole chunk of time there, and it's a really interesting read. As Jardim gained fame, the government of Madeira saw an opportunity, not in surfing, but in coastal development. Like many island and coastal communities, Jardim was battling coastal erosion. You know, it's so exposed to the Atlantic that it just gets hammered by swell constantly. And if nothing was done, the town of Jardim itself was under threat, and authorities feared that without intervention, the town could be at risk. Their solution? A massive concrete seawall and promenade to protect the coastline and attract more tourists to the village. Now, the plan alarmed the surfing community. Environmentalists and surfers argued that the seawall would disrupt how the wave broke at Jardim, resulting in a wave wrecked by backwash and ultimately destroying one of Europe's finest surf breaks. Activists launched protests, gathered petitions, and pleaded with the government to reconsider the plans. And yeah, this is where things got a bit heated, because you had two really intense sides of the story. You know, if you lived in Jardim and you didn't surf, you wanted your house and your town to be protected. You know, you wanted the seawall. But from a surfing perspective, you obviously didn't want it because it would ruin the waves. So there's a really interesting story here that I'll read off Save the Waves website. We marched on the capital of Funchal to protest the seawall and held a press conference. The president of Madeira, Alberto João Jardim, told the press that surfers were barefoot tourists and that we wouldn't even know if a wave broke from the shore to the sea. Our final effort was to hold a protest in the village of Jardim. The cameras were rolling as we arrived in the centre square and attempted to set up our tables. With me were a number of visiting surf emissaries, as well as a few dozen local surfers. The townspeople, who opposed us, showed up in force, yelling, upturning tables and ripping up our signs. As I raised a sign over my head, I was struck in the face. We were forced to retreat to the edge of the town to regroup. What had turned violent and had seemed initially like a failure made national news back on the Portuguese mainland. So yeah, that's obviously a really shocking story. So with news about the wall spreading around the globe and all that could be done in terms of opposing the plans, the surfing world held its breath for the future of Jardim Domar. Despite the pushback, construction of the seawall went ahead in 2003. Bulldozers moved in and the once pristine coastline was transformed into a construction site. They began tipping hundreds of enormous and very ugly concrete blocks onto the shoreline at Jardim, and before long the blocks spilled out and became large enough to affect the wave. Post-construction, the first winter swell rolled into Madeira and revealed what everyone had feared most. Jardim's once perfect right-hander had changed. Instead of a clean, powerful, open-faced right, the wave just broke into the seawall, creating a horrible backwash and waves that broke treacherously close to the wall itself, making surfing tricky, if not impossible. And this was just at low tide when you could surf. High tide was even more dangerous. Former Madeiran champion Orlando Pereira, before the wall, you could surf it on smaller days and the wave was still rideable. Maybe 5 hours around the low tide, but now you can only surf it for 1 hour. And then after that, the waves just break right on the blocks. Within a few years, the crowds that had once flocked to Jardim Domar began to evaporate. And while the wave was still technically rideable, it was a far cry from what it once was. I went there a couple of years ago and even with like 6 foot swell in the water, it was barely even breaking, you know, it's just sort of feathering out back and then just breaking so close into all the rocks. Pretty backwashy, not quite big enough to be ridden. And yeah, I didn't paddle out, just mind surfed a few. It all looked pretty horrible, to be honest. Today, Jardim still breaks, but it's really only a low tide wave and it only really breaks on the biggest winter swells. And when the winds are good, you know, we've all seen those clips of, you know, massive right-handers. It's still a really impressive wave, but it's really not very often that it breaks. The loss of Jardim Domar sent shockwaves through the surfing community and is one of the most famous cases of surf break loss. However, what happened at Jardim became a catalyst for surf break conservation worldwide. In fact, Save the Waves itself was actually born from the project at Jardim, and Jardim is being used as a case study to prevent other such projects from happening and destroying waves. While the wave's original beauty may never return, its story serves as a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between nature and human intervention. To this day, Jardim Domar still remains a stunningly beautiful coastal village, and it still attracts visitors for its charm, history and connection to the sea. And there are still waves, just not very often, and it's still a shadow of its former self. A once perfect wave lost to the hands of progress. If you watch this channel regularly, you'll know it's something I talk about a lot. And around the world, there have been several other legendary breaks that have been buried under concrete blocks, or that currently face threats from coastal development, industrial expansion, and even climate change. However, the loss of Jardim Domar has fueled new efforts to protect the world's greatest waves, and organisations like Save the Waves work with local governments to ensure that development does not come at the expense of the ocean's natural wonders. For those who remember Jardim in its prime, the memories of those perfect, wally right-handers will never fade. Obviously, this has been a bit of a sad story. If you've got any more information on the history of Jardim, or if you went there like back in the day, please let me know what it was like. But I hope you've enjoyed the story as much as something like this can be enjoyed. For now, it's goodbye from me, and I'll see you in the next episode.